A privilege to meet you, Dr. Radhakrishnan.
So is mine.
As you may be aware, my mother has left behind a rich legacy. In her fond memory, I would request you to address a few words.
An exceptional woman in social work. She was not just an angel or a saint, but a simple good woman who treated domestic obligations as of higher importance than public service. If each woman strives to take the savageness of the members of her own family, she will have helped to make gentle the life of this world.
Oh, I see you still here. You must not be convinced by the doctor's speech, are you? My mother? I know her. Perhaps better than she did herself. Come with me. I shall introduce you to her. Remember the name. Mrs. Kamala Satyanandan, born Hannah Ratnam Krishnamma. One of the major points of contention amongst the Indians, mostly males who had been active in the public sphere in the late colonial period, was the woman question. Now that the surges of nationalism had been seething free with India establishing ties with the brave new world, what could be done to throw open the gates of the Ondur Mahal? How would the sweet songbird residing within the auspices of that space be introduced to this expansive world of light? Most importantly, to what extent? Such were the questions raised by the zealous modern nationalists who dreamt of the lettered Indian woman. Mind you, still the songbird caged behind golden bars, now singing English lays of bonny tunes. For although the nationalists envisioned the coloured feminine with a book under her arm, her hands, they agreed, must yet wield a stirring utensil. All of this, however limited, was accessible only to the privileged. Born in a progressive Telugu Christian family, Hannah had a smooth access to education. In lieu of a traditional dowry, her father helped her gain access to an avenue that made possible economic self-sufficiency. Her early exposure to the Western systems of knowledge fostered in her a worldview that transcended the limits of the household. To her, education was of the utmost importance, and she understood it as a need of the hour, especially if women were to break out of the shackles of dependency. So at 18, when her family arranged her marriage to one Dr. Samuel Satyanandan, Hannah could not help but feel threatened. But father...
Hannah, I believe you are of age now. Besides, you have had enough to do with your books. We never stopped you, nor are we stopping you now. Consent to the marriage. After it is done, you can carry on to your heart's content.
I cannot abandon my education, father. Would you really have me marry this man now that I am so close to reaching my goal?
Enough! You will marry this man.
Then what was the point of hustling this far? Hannah wondered. What, after all, was the difference between the subjection by the Western Empire and by the patriarch at home? Father, may I have a word with you?
What is the matter?
You have brought me up with the best education a woman can have. Your guidance has taught me to be a speaker. So I shall speak. I will consent to this marriage on the condition that Dr. Satyanandan lets me pursue college.
Fair enough.
Following her marriage to Dr. Satyanandan, Hannah took the name Kamala, the name by which she would later be remembered. For a girl of 18 with an open mind and an acute consciousness of women's position in the patriarchy, the sudden change of name unsettled her somewhere. Was she not Hannah anymore? How could she possibly embrace a name commonly bestowed yet so alien to herself? Nevertheless, she would have to. Now that she was married, her responsibilities as a woman had greatly altered, and she was ready to honor them, while at the same time preserving her unique sense of self. Endeavoring thus, Kamala became the first woman from South India to have a master's degree. Her life was to take a significant turn shortly after.
Your conversations with Mr. Iyer regarding the matters of sanitation this evening were quite impactful.
Thank you. I have been thinking, what if women, I, could have a platform solely of mine own, of women? You know, to speak, to write, and not suffer the slings of men's fountain pens. I was thinking, perhaps a periodical of sorts, a magazine even.
Why don't you start compiling works of your female peers and turn it into a periodical?
Do you say so, dear? I see several women's magazines written and edited by men. Their opinions are skewed and counterproductive. If only I could. Do you believe that I can make that happen?
Of course. You have the education, you have a circle. I am here to support you if no one else is. As you just mentioned, there are so many women's magazines out there run by men who only pretend to know the sufferings of women. If it is not you, then who?
The first issue of the Indian Ladies' Magazine came out in 1901. In the increasingly male-dominated sphere of periodicals, ILM emerged as one of the few platforms that provided literate women with the opportunity to articulate and participate in journalism under the all-encompassing project of the awakening of Indian womanhood. It took Kamala glances sideways and a bend of a hand. Glances sideways and a bend of a hand. And soon she began to collect papers, arranging them in perfect order. Soon she began to collect voices, arranging them into a perfect melody. From literary criticism and the nitty-gritties of domesticity to discussions on social issues such as women's education and upliftment, ILM's scope was expansive. Kamala's emphasis on the social came from a staunch belief that the modern woman had an ethical responsibility towards the community as well. The editor accommodated both conservative and progressive points of view, representing both traditionalism and modernity. Although the magazine subscribed to the impulses of nationalism, Kamala incorporated what she called the best from the West and left the rest. Perhaps in several ways, ILM embodied the hyphenated identity of the modern colonized subject. Since the idea of modernity came to India through her colonizer, its manifestation in the Indian spirit would definitely not be a seamless one. In the spirit of Tagore's notion of the union of the best from the East and the West, Kamala's editorship helped synthesize Victorian ideals with traditional Indian identity. The new Indian woman was to be active both in the Andur Mahal and in the social world. Dr. Samuel Satyanandan's sudden death in 1906 put financial responsibility on Kamala's shoulders, who took up the job of tutoring a Rani in a Mufassil town. Meanwhile, ILM continued till the year 1918, when its first run came to an end. The second run of the Indian Ladies' Magazine saw Padmini Satyanandan Sengupta in the role of the assistant editor. She had already been a contributor during the magazine's first run. In the changed political scenario of 1927, Kamala found herself doubting the relevance of the magazine. The increased participation of women and students in the active politics in the public sphere did not sit right with her, as she expressed a personal dislike for conferences and committees. In her opinion, the arena that women could venture into was that of the social, not political, and home was still to be the locus from which they should have operated. The second run had retained its original ideology, that is, to help procure women's access to education and act as a mouthpiece for the synthetic new Indian womanhood. However, the changed circumstances problematized this idea of womanhood that simultaneously drew from ancient Indian and Victorian ideals. Kamala Satyanandan's influence was not diminished with the end of the Indian Ladies' Magazine. Her legacy was ultimately documented by her daughter Padmini Satyanandan Sengupta in her hagiographical account of her mother, The Portrait of an Indian Woman. And that was her. In a few minutes, though there is more, but an unfortunate scarcity of time. I have haunted Kamala's shade, and I have felt that my wild pursuing can only cease when I have, in my humble way, paid my homage to this extraordinary, yet ordinary woman, who was so loved by us and played so dynamic a part for 70 years in the southern presidency of India. So here I am, once again.
Nadratani tajam takata tajam tadirana tadirana tirana tilana tadirana tadirana നടമാടും നടരാജൻ ആനന്ദ നടമാ